Welcome to a chilling journey into the heart of darkness, where the quiet whispers of a small town conceal secrets too horrific to imagine. Tonight, we unravel a tale from Willow Creek, a place where the past lingers like fog over the marshes, and innocence is a fragile illusion. Settle in, let the rain outside tap against your window, and allow the story to pull you into its depths. If you're joining us from afar, leave a comment to share where you're tuning in from. It's always a thrill to know our listeners span the globe. Now, let's dive into the haunting mystery of Willow Creek, where a single night changed everything. Willow Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of northern Oregon, is the kind of place you'd drive through and forget before the next bend in the road. With a population barely cresting 1,200, it's a speck on the map. Surrounded by dense pine forests and a winding river that sparkles under the summer sun but turns treacherous in the winter rains. The town's heart is its main street, lined with a general store, a diner called May's Place, and a hardware shop that's been run by the same family for 3 generations. The air carries the scent of damp earth and cedar, and the locals pride themselves on knowing everyone's business, though some secrets, it turns out, are buried deeper than others. In the spring of 2011, Willow Creek was a town of routine. Farmers tended to their fields, children played in the park near the old mill, and the annual county fair was the biggest event on the calendar. But beneath the surface of this idyllic community, tensions simmered, rivalries between families, old grudges, and whispers of things left unsaid. At the center of our story is the Harper family, whose lives would unravel in a way that would leave Willow Creek forever scarred. Elijah Harper was a man of quiet determination, a 42-year-old mechanic who ran Harper's auto shop on the edge of town. His hands were calloused, his face weathered from years under the hoods of cars, but his warm brown eyes and easy smile made him a favorite among the locals. Elijah had grown up in Willow Creek, the son of a logger who died in a mill accident when Elijah was just a boy. He'd built his life from the ground up, marrying his high school sweetheart, Clara, at 20, and raising 3 children in a modest 2-story home on Maple Lane. Clara Harper, 39, was the heart of the family. A schoolteacher at Willow Creek Elementary, she was known for her patience and her knack for turning even the rowdiest kids into eager learners. Her laugh could fill a room, and her homemade blackberry pie was a staple at every town potluck. But Clara carried a quiet burden. Her younger sister Lila had vanished 10 years earlier, leaving behind only rumors and heartache. The loss had etched lines of grief into Clara's face, though she hid it well behind her cheerful demeanor. Their children were the pride of their lives. The eldest, 17-year-old Mia, was a star student with dreams of studying marine biology. She spent her summers volunteering at the river cleanup and had a quiet intensity that set her apart from her peers. Lucas, 14, was the family's jokester, always tinkering with gadgets in the garage alongside his father, his mop of curly hair perpetually falling into his eyes. The youngest, 8-year-old Sophie, was a whirlwind of energy, with a love for drawing, and a habit of leaving crayons scattered across the kitchen table. The Harpers were well liked, their home a hub of warmth and activity. But in the spring of 2011, a shadow began to creep over their lives, one that no one in Willow Creek could have foreseen. In late March, a stranger arrived in Willow Creek. Daniel Vance, a 30-year-old drifter with a weathered leather jacket and a crooked smile, rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town. He claimed to be a freelance photographer, drawn to the area for its natural beauty. But his arrival stirred unease among the locals. His eyes, a piercing gray, seemed to linger too long, and his stories about his past were vague, shifting with each telling. He'd spend hours at May's diner, nursing a coffee and scribbling in a worn notebook, watching the townsfolk with an intensity that made their skin crawl. Daniel's presence coincided with a string of odd occurrences. Tools went missing from Elijah's shop tires were slashed on a few cars, and late-night footsteps were heard in the alleys behind Main Street. The townsfolk whispered about the newcomer, some calling him a troublemaker, others wondering if he was running from something or someone. Elijah, ever practical, dismissed the rumors. "He's just a guy passing through," he'd say, wiping grease from his hands. But Clara wasn't so sure. She'd seen Daniel lingering near the school, his camera pointed at the playground where Sophie played. On May 17, 2011, the Harper family settled in for what should have been an ordinary evening. Elijah had closed the shop early to help Lucas with a science project, a model rocket that kept misfiring. Clara was grading papers at the kitchen table, her glasses perched on her nose, while Mia helped Sophie with a drawing of a horse. The air was thick with the scent of rain, a storm brewing over the hills. By 9 p.m., the children were in bed, and Elijah and Clara shared a quiet moment on the porch, listening to the first drops patter against the roof. What happened next would haunt Willow Creek for decades. At around 2 a.m., a neighbor, old Mrs. Callahan, was woken by a strange, noisy-low, guttural sound, like a wounded animal. Peering out her window, she saw a figure moving through the Harpers' backyard, a silhouette against the flickering porch light. She thought to call the police, but hesitated, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks. By morning, the Harper house was silent, its windows dark, the front door slightly ajar. At 7:30 a.m., 12-year-old Tommy Reed, a paperboy, rode his bike down Maple Lane. He noticed the Harper's door open, an unusual sight for a family known for their early mornings. Curious, he dismounted and approached the porch, calling out for Mia, his classmate. There was no answer. Stepping closer, he froze. Blood streaked the doorstep, a crimson smear that glistened in the dawn light. Heart pounding, Tommy dropped his bike and ran to the nearest house, banging on the door until Mr. Jenkins, a retired deputy, answered. Jenkins followed Tommy back to the Harper house, his gut twisting as he saw the blood. He pushed the door open, calling out for Elijah. The living room was eerily untouched couch, cushions neat, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. But as he stepped into the hallway, the air grew heavy with the coppery scent of blood. There, sprawled across the floor, was Elijah, his face unrecognizable, his skull caved in. Jenkins staggered back, his breath catching as he dialed 911. Sheriff Laura Bennett arrived within minutes, her deputies fanning out to secure the scene. The house was a slaughterhouse. Clara lay in the kitchen, her body crumpled against the stove, her throat slashed so deeply it nearly severed her head. Upstairs, Lucas was found in his bed, his hands still clutching the sheets, his chest riddled with stab wounds. Sophie, little Sophie, was in the bathroom, her small form curled in the tub, her drawings scattered across the floor, now stained red. Mia was missing. The deputies moved through the house, their faces pale, their boots leaving prints in the blood. The walls were marred with gashes, as if someone had swung a blade in a frenzy. A bloody handprint marked the back door, and a trail of droplets led into the yard, disappearing into the wet grass. Sheriff Bennett, a 20-year veteran, felt her stomach churn. She'd seen accidents, bar fights, even a suicide or two, but nothing like this. This wasn't random, she whispered to her deputy, Mark Torres. This was personal. By noon, Willow Creek was buzzing with fear and speculation. News. Vans lined Main Street, and neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, their eyes darting to the Harper house. The police set up a perimeter, their radios crackling with updates. The coroner, Dr. Ellen Hayes, arrived to examine the bodies, her hands trembling as she cataloged the wounds. Elijah had been struck at least 20 times with a blunt object, likely a crowbar or hammer. Clara's throat wound suggested a large knife, wielded with precision. Lucas and Sophie had been stabbed repeatedly, their injuries chaotic. As if the killer had lost control, The absence of Mia was the first clue that this was no ordinary crime. Her room was untouched, no blood, no signs of struggle. Her phone, wallet, and shoes were still there, but her backpack was gone. Sheriff Bennett ordered a search of the surrounding woods, fearing the worst. Was Mia a victim, or had she fled? The possibility that she was involved hung in the air. It's unspoken, but heavy. Attention quickly turned to Daniel Vance. His cabin was searched that afternoon, revealing a collection of unsettling items. A notebook filled with cryptic sketches of the town, a map with the Harper house circled, and a hunting knife with traces of blood. Daniel was nowhere to be found, his truck missing from the driveway. An APB was issued, and the town braced for answers. As the day wore on, volunteers joined the police in combing the forests around Willow Creek. The rain had turned the ground to mud, erasing footprints, but a dog handler picked up a scent near the river. It led to a tattered piece of fabric, later identified as part of Mia's jacket. The discovery sent a chill through the search party. Was she out there, injured, or worse? Meanwhile, Clara's sister, Lila, became a focal point. Though she'd vanished a decade earlier, her disappearance was never solved. Some in town believed she'd run away, others that she'd met foul play. Clara had never stopped searching, keeping a box of Lila's belongings in the attic. When deputies searched the Harper house, they found the box open, its contents scattered. A locket, engraved with Lila's initials, was missing. Sheriff Bennett began to suspect a connection. Had someone from Lila's past returned? Was Daniel Vance linked to her disappearance? The blood on his knife was sent for DNA testing, but results would take days. In the meantime, the sheriff interviewed Mia's friends, who described her as withdrawn in recent weeks, often seen talking to Daniel near the river. One friend, Sarah, recalled Mia saying, "He knows things about my family, things I don't understand." By evening, Willow Creek was a town on edge. Doors were locked, curtains drawn. Parents kept their children inside, and May's diner, usually bustling, was nearly empty. Rumors swirled. Daniel was a serial killer, a drifter with a vendetta, or even Lila's long-lost lover seeking revenge. Others whispered about me, wondering if she'd snapped under the pressure of her mother's grief or her own ambitions. Sheriff Bennett worked through the night, piecing together the timeline. The Harpers had been killed between midnight and 2 a.m., based on the coroner's estimate. The murder weapons, a crowbar and a knife, were missing. Though a toolbox in Elijah's garage was open, its contents disturbed. A neighbor reported seeing a truck idling near the Harper house around 1 a.m. But the rain had obscured the details. On May 19th, 2 days after the murders, a breakthrough came. A gas station clerk 50 miles south of Willow Creek reported seeing Daniel Vance at 4 a.m. on May 18th. He'd bought a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of bleach, his hands shaking as he paid. Security footage confirmed it was him, his jacket stained with what looked like blood. The clerk noted he'd driven off in a hurry. Heading toward the highway, Sheriff Bennett issued a nationwide alert, and by noon, Daniel's truck was spotted. In a motel parking lot in Idaho, local police surrounded the motel, their guns drawn. Daniel surrendered without a fight, his face blank, his clothes still carrying the faint scent of bleach. In his truck, they found a backpack, Mia's backpack, stained with blood and stuffed with cash from Elijah's shop. But Mia was still missing in the interrogation room. Daniel was a study in contradictions. He spoke softly, his voice almost melodic, but his answers were evasive. He claimed he'd been in his cabin all night, alone, and had no idea why his knife had blood on it. When pressed about Mia, he smiled faintly. "She's a smart girl," he said. "Smarter than you think." The blood on the knife matched Clara's, and fibers in his truck linked to Sophie's pajamas. But Daniel's story didn't add up. He claimed he'd never been to the Harper house. Yet his notebook contained a detailed sketch of their floor plan. Sheriff Bennett leaned in, her voice steady. "Where's Mia? Daniel. What did you do to her?" He leaned back, his gray eyes glinting. "You're asking the wrong questions, Sheriff. You should be asking who Mia really is." As the investigation deepened, a shocking revelation emerged. Mia's laptop, recovered from her room, contained a hidden folder of emails. They were sent to an anonymous account, detailing her family's routines, Elijah's shop hours, even Clara's late-night walks. The emails began 3 months earlier, around the time Daniel arrived in town. One read, "They don't suspect anything. I'll make sure the back door is unlocked." The realization hit Sheriff Bennett like a punch. Mia wasn't a victim, she was involved. But why? What could drive a 17-year-old to betray her family? The answer lay in the box of Lila's belongings. Among the scattered items was a journal, written in Lila's hand, detailing a secret affair with a man named D. The dates matched Daniel's age, and a faded photo in the journal showed a younger Daniel, arm around Lila. Lila's disappearance had been no accident. Daniel had been her lover, and when she tried to leave him, he'd ensured she'd never be found. Mia, digging into her aunt's past, had uncovered the truth and tracked Daniel down. But instead of exposing him, she'd struck a deal. The cash in Elijah's shop, saved for her college fund, was her ticket out of Willow Creek. She'd promised Daniel a cut if he helped her stage a robbery. But something went wrong. Daniel's rage, fueled by years of hiding, exploded. He didn't just want the money, he wanted revenge on the family that had taken Lila from him. Mia, caught in the chaos, had fled, leaving her family to die. With Daniel in custody, the search for Mia intensified. Her backpack in his truck suggested she'd been with him after the murders, but her trail went cold. Sheriff Bennett scoured the emails, finding one final clue. A mention of a cabin in the Cascades, a place Lila had once described as her sanctuary. It was a long shot, but the sheriff dispatched a team to the remote location. On May 22nd, they found her. Mia was huddled in the cabin, her face gaunt, her hands trembling. She didn't resist when the deputies cuffed her. In her pocket was Lila's locket, its chain stained with blood. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. "I just wanted to be free." The trial of Daniel Vance and Mia Harper gripped the nation. Daniel was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, his defense claiming he'd acted in a drug-fueled haze. The jury didn't buy it. He was sentenced to life without parole, his gray eyes empty as the verdict was read. Mia's trial was more complex. At 17, she was tried as an adult, charged with conspiracy and accessory to murder. Her defense argued she was a victim of manipulation, a teenager coerced by a predator. But the emails and her role in unlocking the door sealed her fate. She was sentenced to 25 years, her dreams of marine biology replaced by a cell. Willow Creek never recovered. The Harper house was boarded up, its windows dark. May's Diner closed, and the annual fair felt hollow. A memorial for Elijah, Clara, Lucas and Sophie was erected by the river, where Sophie's drawings were framed in glass. The town vowed to remember them, not for their deaths, but for the light they brought. But late at night, when the rain falls and the wind howls through the pines, some say they hear whispers in Willow Creek, whispers of a girl who wanted freedom, and a man who brought only death. Welcome back to another dark tale that will pull you into the shadows of a quiet town where secrets fester like wounds. Tonight, we journey to Hollow Ridge, a forgotten corner of West Virginia where the hills whisper of lost souls and the truth is as elusive as the morning mist. If you're tuning in to drift off or to chase the thrill of a mystery, let us know where you're joining us from in the comments below. Like and subscribe to stay immersed in these haunting stories. Now, settle in. Let the rain outside lull you. and step into the chilling mystery of Hollow Ridge, where one family's dream of a fresh start became a nightmare. Hollow Ridge sits, cradled in the Appalachian Mountains, a town of 900 souls where the air is thick with the scent of coal, dust, and pine. The main road, barely paved, winds past a crumbling church, a general store called Tucker's, and a bar where miners drown their days in cheap whiskey. The hills loom over everything, their dense forests hiding abandoned mine shafts and the ghosts of a once thriving coal industry. In Hollow Ridge, everyone knows your name, but they also know your secrets, or so they think. In the fall of 2014, Hollow Ridge was a place struggling to survive. The last mine had closed a decade earlier, leaving behind empty homes and broken dreams. The townsfolk clung to tradition, gathering for Friday night football and the annual Harvest Festival, but a quiet desperation hung over the community. Families left for bigger cities, and those who stayed carried the weight of a town on the brink. Into this fading world came the Brennan family, seeking refuge from their own troubles. Thomas Brennan, 45, was a former accountant from Pittsburgh who'd lost his job when his firm downsized. With his savings dwindling and his marriage strained, he saw Hollow Ridge as a chance to start over. A reserved man with a quick mind and a stubborn streak, Thomas bought a fixer-upper farmhouse on the edge of town, its sagging porch and peeling paint a testament to years of neglect. He dreamed of turning it into a bed and breakfast, a place where city folk could escape to the mountains. His wife, Margaret, 42, was a nurse who'd worked double shifts to keep the family afloat. Her sharp wit and warm smile masked a deep exhaustion, and the move to Hollow Ridge was her chance to slow down. She'd grown up in a small town and hoped the quiet would heal the cracks in their family. But Margaret carried a secret to brief, affair years earlier that she'd never confessed to Thomas. A guilt that gnawed at her in the quiet moments. Their children were a study in contrasts. Emily, 16, was a fiery artist with a sketchbook always in hand, her dark hair streaked with blue to the dismay of her parents. She hated the move, resenting the loss of her city friends and the spotty internet in Hollow Ridge. Jacob, 12, was shy and bookish, his nose always buried in fantasy novels. He saw the move as an adventure, imagining the forests as realms of dragons and knights. The youngest, 6-year-old Lily, was the family's sunshine, her giggles echoing through the farmhouse as she chased fireflies in the yard. The Brennans arrived in Hollow Ridge in August 2014, their U-Haul kicking up dust on the dirt road. The townsfolk watched with curiosity, some offering casseroles, others muttering about outsiders. Thomas threw himself into renovations, while Margaret took a job at the county clinic. Emily sulked, Jacob explored, and Lily made friends with every stray cat in the neighborhood. For a moment, it seemed the Brennans might find their place, but something sinister was already watching. In early September, a man named Caleb Morrow appeared in Hollow Ridge, lean and weathered, with a scruffy beard and eyes like chipped flint. He claimed to be a hiker passing through, staying at a rundown motel by the highway. Caleb was in his late 30s, his voice low and gravelly, his clothes patched but clean. He carried a backpack stuffed with maps and a camera, saying he was documenting forgotten towns for a blog. But his questions were too pointed about the mines. The old families, the Brennans' new farmhouse. Caleb's arrival stirred unease. He'd linger at Tucker's, buying cigarettes and asking about land records, or sit on a bench outside the church, watching the townsfolk with a predator's patience. Old man Tucker, who'd seen his share of drifters, warned Margaret to keep an eye on her kids. "That one's got a shadow on him," he said, spitting tobacco into a cup. Margaret nodded, but her mind was on the farmhouse, where strange things were starting to happen. Tools vanished from Thomas's shed. Footprints appeared in the mud around the property, too large to be Jacob's. At night, Emily swore she heard whispers outside her window. though the forest was silent when she looked. Lily began talking about the man in the trees, a figure she saw watching her from the woods. Thomas dismissed it as childish imagination, but Margaret felt a chill. She'd seen Caleb near the clinic, his camera trained on her as she left work. On October 12, 2014, the Brennans gathered for a rare family dinner. Thomas had made progress on the farmhouse, installing new windows, and Margaret had cooked her mother's lasagna recipe. Emily, still sullen, sketched at the table, while Jacob read aloud from The Hobbit to Lily, who giggled at his dramatic voices. The Harvest Festival was a week away, and the family planned to attend, hoping to feel part of the community. By 10 p.m., the house was quiet, the children in bed, and Thomas and Margaret sat by the fireplace, sharing a glass of wine outside. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that swallows sound and blurs the edges of the world. At around 1 a.m., a neighbor, Mrs. Elsie Boone, woke to the sound of breaking glass. She lived a quarter-mile away, her trailer perched on a hill overlooking the Brennan farmhouse. Peering through her binoculars, a habit from years of watching deer, she saw a flicker of movement in the Brennans' yard. A figure, tall and lean, slipped through the back door. Elsie reached for her phone but stopped, remembering the spotty cell service. By the time she drove to the sheriff's station, it was too late. At 6:45 a.m., a delivery driver, Hank Grayson, arrived at the Brennan farmhouse with a load of lumber. He noticed the front door wide open, the porch light flickering. Calling out for Thomas, he stepped inside and stopped dead. The living room was in chaos, furniture overturned. A lamp shattered on the floor. Blood streaked the walls, pooling. On the hardwood, Hank stumbled back, his breath ragged, and called 911 from his truck, Sheriff Amos Reed. A grizzled man with 30 years on the job arrived with his deputies. The scene inside was a slaughter. Thomas lay in the hallway, his skull crushed, his arms raised as if warding off a blow. Margaret was in the kitchen, her body slumped against the counter, a butcher knife embedded in her chest. Jacob was found in his room, his throat slit, his book still open on the bed. Lily, poor Lily, was in the attic, her small body wrapped in a blanket, her face bruised and lifeless. But Emily was gone. The deputies swept the house, their faces ashen. The walls bore marks of a struggle, gouges, blood spatter, a broken chair. A window in the back was smashed, glass glittering in the grass outside. Sheriff Reed noted the absence of forced entry. The back door had been unlocked. Someone knew their way around, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. The trail of blood led into the woods, then vanished in the fog. By mid-morning, Hollow Ridge was in a panic. The sheriff's station was flooded with calls, and reporters swarmed the town, their cameras flashing at the cordoned-off farmhouse. The coroner, Dr. Samuel Holt, cataloged the wounds. Thomas had been bludgeoned with a heavy object, possibly a sledgehammer. Margaret's knife wound was precise, a single deep thrust. Jacob's throat was cut with a smaller blade, and Lily had been strangled, her neck marked with finger bruises. The brutality suggested rage, but the unlocked door hinted at betrayal. Emily's absence was the biggest mystery. Her room was a mess, drawings torn, her phone smashed, but there was no blood. Her sketchbook, found under her bed, contained a chilling detail, a sketch of a man with flinty eyes, labeled CM in her looping script. Sheriff Reed's gut told him Caleb Morrow was involved, and a search of his motel room confirmed it. Inside, they found a map of Hollow Ridge with the Brennan farmhouse marked, a coil of rope, and a sledgehammer with traces of blood. Caleb was gone. His motel room abandoned. His car nowhere in sight. An APB went out, and the town braced for answers. Volunteers scoured the hills, their flashlights cutting through the fog. A bloodhound picked up Emily's scent near an old mine shaft, but the trail ended at a stream. The water cold and swift. As the investigation deepened, Margaret's secret came to light. A coworker at the clinic, Nancy Wells, revealed that Margaret had confided in her about her affair. It had been with a man named Caleb Monroe, a drifter she'd met in Pittsburgh years ago. Margaret had ended it, but Caleb had sent letters, threatening to expose her unless she paid him. When the Brennans moved to Hollow Ridge, Margaret thought she'd escaped him. But Caleb Morrow was Caleb Monroe, using a new name to hide his past. Nancy's revelation shifted the case. Caleb had tracked Margaret to Hollow Ridge, his obsession reignited. But why target the whole family? And where was Emily? The sheriff dug into Caleb's history, uncovering a string of arrest, stalking, assault, a restraining order filed by another woman years earlier. He was a man who didn't let go. On October 14th, a tip came from a trucker who'd seen a girl matching Emily's description at a gas station 30 miles away. She'd been with a man in a leather jacket, her face pale, her movements hesitant. The clerk said she'd bought a candy bar and left in a beat-up sedan. Sheriff Reed dispatched a team, but the trail went cold again. Emily's sketchbook offered another clue, a drawing of an abandoned mine labeled Hollow's End. It was a notorious spot, a collapsed shaft where locals swore the air felt wrong. A search team reached Hollow's End at dawn on October and worse. The mine's entrance was boarded up, but fresh pry marks suggested someone had been inside. Deputies forced their way in, their flashlights illuminating damp walls and rusted tracks. Deep in the shaft, they found her Emily, bound and gagged, her blue-streaked hair matted with dirt. She was alive, but barely, her wrists raw, her eyes hollow. Beside her was a duffel bag with $5,000 in Cash Thomas's savings for the bed and breakfast. Emily was rushed to the hospital, incoherent from shock. She mumbled about Caleb, about a plan gone wrong. The sheriff pieced it together. Emily, rebellious and desperate to leave Hollow Ridge, had met Caleb at Tucker's. He'd preyed on her, anger, promising her freedom in exchange for information about her family's money. She'd left the back door unlocked, thinking it was a simple theft. But Caleb's motives were darker. Rooted in his obsession with Margaret, Caleb's sedan was spotted in Ohio on October 16th, abandoned at a rest stop. Inside, police found Margaret's wedding ring, a bloodied shirt, and a notebook with ramblings about betrayal and revenge. Caleb's obsession with Margaret had consumed him, and when she rejected him again, he'd snapped, killing her family to punish her. Emily was meant to be his leverage, a hostage to ensure his escape. The manhunt stretched across 3 states. On October 18th, a hiker in the Alleghenies reported a man matching Caleb's description camping near a creek. SWAT teams moved in, surrounding the site at dawn. Caleb, cornered, pulled a knife but dropped it when faced with a dozen rifles. His arrest was quiet, his face a mask of defiance. Caleb Morrow's trial began in March 2015, drawing crowds to the county courthouse. The prosecution painted him as a predator, a man whose obsession turned deadly. The sledgehammer's blood matched Thomas and Lily, and fibers in his car linked to Jacob's pajamas. Emily's testimony was the nail in his coffin. Tearful, she admitted her role, describing how Caleb had manipulated her, promising a new life. "I didn't know he'd hurt them," she sobbed. "I just wanted out." Caleb was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, sentenced to life without parole. Emily faced charges of conspiracy and theft. But her cooperation earned her a plea deal. 5 years in juvenile detention, followed by probation. The town grappled with her role. Some saw her as a victim, others as a traitor. Hollow Ridge buried. Its dead in a quiet ceremony, the harvest festival canceled. The Brennan farmhouse was sold, its new owners unaware of its history. A memorial bench was placed by the church, engraved with the family's names. Emily, released in 2020, left Hollow Ridge, her whereabouts unknown. Some say she paints under a new name, her art dark and haunting. Caleb's prison letters leaked to the press revealed his lack of remorse. "They took her from me," he wrote of Margaret. "They deserved it." The town, once tight-knit, grew wary, neighbors eyeing each other with suspicion. Tucker's closed, and the bar saw fewer faces. Hollow Ridge became a ghost of itself, its hills echoing with the memory of a family lost. Gather close, listeners, as we descend into the eerie stillness of Blackthorn Hollow, a place where the wind carries whispers of forgotten sins, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. This is a tale of a community torn apart by a crime so brutal it left scars that never healed. If you're tuning in to unravel this chilling mystery, drop a comment below to share where you're joining us from across the globe. Hit that like and subscribe button to stay locked into these haunting stories. Now, let the patter of rain outside guides you into the shadows of Blackthorn Hollow, where one family's search for peace ended in unimaginable horror. Blackthorn Hollow, tucked in the rugged hills of eastern Kentucky, is a town that time seems to have overlooked. With a population of just under 1,000, it's a patchwork of sagging porches, dirt roads, and fields of wild blackthorn bushes that give the place its name. The heart of the town is a small square with a weathered statue of a coal miner, a nod to the industry that once sustained it. There's a diner called Rosie's, a post office that doubles as a gossip hub, and a Baptist church where hymns drift into the night air. The hills, cloaked in oak and hickory, loom over everything, their shadows stretching long and dark as evening falls. In the summer of 2017, Blackthorn Hollow was a town of quiet resilience. The coal mines had shut down years ago, leaving behind a struggling economy and a sense of pride tinged with bitterness. Families held tight to their land, their faith, and their secrets. The annual Blackthorn Festival, where locals sold homemade jam and competed in pie baking contests, was the highlight of the year. But beneath the surface, old grudges simmered, land disputes, family feuds, and whispers of things better left unsaid. Into this fragile world came the Whitaker family, hoping for a fresh start. Samuel Whitaker, 48, was a carpenter with hands rough as sandpaper and a heart softened by years of hardship. He'd grown up in Louisville, where he'd built a modest business crafting furniture. But a string of bad contracts and a costly divorce left him starting over. Blackthorn Hollow, with its cheap land and quiet pace, seemed like the perfect place to rebuild. Samuel bought a sprawling farmhouse on the edge of town, its wraparound porch offering views of the rolling hills. He was a man of few words, but his steady presence and skill with a hammer earned him respect among the locals. His second wife, Lynn, 40, was a librarian with a love for history and a gentle demeanor that drew people to her. She'd met Samuel at a book club in Louisville, where their shared love of old novels sparked a romance. Ellen saw Blackthorn Hollow as a chance to escape the city's noise and raise their blended family in peace. But she carried a private fear stalker from her past, a man who'd sent threatening letters after their brief relationship ended. She'd never told Samuel, hoping distance would keep her safe. Their children were a mix of their pasts. Samuel's daughter, 17-year-old Abigail, was a quiet girl with a talent for playing the fiddle. Her mother's abandonment had left her guarded, but she found solace in music, practicing late into the night. Ellen's son, 14-year-old Noah, was a science nerd, always tinkering with model rockets or dissecting plants from the woods. The youngest, 9-year-old Grace, was Samuel and Ellen's daughter together, a bright spark with a love for storytelling and a habit of leaving books scattered across the house. The Whitakers arrived in Blackthorn Hollow in June 2017, their pickup truck loaded with boxes and hope. The townsfolk welcomed them with casseroles and curious glances, though some whispered about city folks stirring up trouble. Samuel began taking carpentry jobs, Ellen organized the town library and the children adjusted to their new life. Abigail joined the church choir. Noah explored the hills, and Grace made friends at the playground. For a moment, it seemed the Whitakers had found their haven. But darkness was already creeping closer. In late July, a man named Vincent Cole drifted into Blackthorn Hollow. Tall and wiry, with a shaved head and a scar running down his left cheek. Vincent was in his early 40s, his voice smooth but laced, with an edge. He rented a trailer on the outskirts of town, claiming to be a geologist studying the region's abandoned mines. He carried a satchel filled with maps and rock samples, but his eyes dark and unblinking seemed to study the townsfolk, more than the land. He'd sit at Rosie's diner, sipping coffee and asking questions about old families, land deeds, and the Whitakers' farmhouse, which had once belonged to a notorious recluse. Vincent's presence unsettled the town. He'd linger near the school, his gaze fixed on children playing, or wander the hills at night with a flashlight. Rosie, the diner's owner, caught him sketching the town square, his drawings detailed to an eerie degree. "He ain't right," she told Samuel over a plate of biscuits. Samuel shrugged it off, focused on his work, but Ellen felt a chill. She'd seen Vincent outside the library, his camera pointed at her as she locked up. When she mentioned it to Sheriff Clara Hayes, the sheriff promised to keep an eye on him. But with only 2 deputies, resources were thin. Strange occurrences followed Vincent's arrival. Livestock went missing from nearby farms. Tire tracks appeared in the mud near the Whitakers' property. At night, Grace complained of footsteps outside her window, though the grass showed no signs of disturbance. Noah found a knife buried in the dirt near their barn, its blade rusted but sharp. Ellen began locking the doors at dusk, her old fears resurfacing. She wondered if Vincent was the man from her past, but his face didn't match the blurry memory of her stalker. On August 23, 2017, the Whitakers gathered for a family game night, a rare evening of laughter in their busy lives. Samuel had finished a bookshelf for Ellen, who'd spent the day cataloging books at the library. Abigail played a mournful tune on her fiddle, while Noah and Grace battled over a Monopoly board, Grace's giggles filling the room. The Blackthorn Festival was days away, and the family planned to enter Ellen's peach pie in the contest. By 10 p.m., the children were in bed, and Samuel and Ellen sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of impending rain outside. The hills were shrouded in darkness, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. At around 2 a.m., a neighbor, Mr. Amos Tate, was woken by a sharp crack like a branch snapping underfoot. From his window, he saw a faint light moving through the Whitakers' yard, disappearing into the house. Amos, a widower with bad knees, hesitated to investigate. He called the sheriff's station, but the line was busy. A rare storm had knocked out power in parts of town. By the time he tried again, the light was gone. At 7 a.m., Jenny Lyle, a mail carrier, pulled up to the Whitaker farmhouse. The front door was ajar, the porch light off a stark contrast to the family's usual routine. She called out for Ellen, her friend from the library, but got no reply. Stepping closer, Jenny noticed a smear of blood on the doorframe, dark and glistening. Her heart raced as she pushed the door open, her voice trembling. "Samuel? Ellen. Ellen." Inside, the house was a tomb. The living room was untouched, a Monopoly board still on the table, but the air carried a metallic temps. In the kitchen, Samuel lay sprawled on the floor, his head bashed in, blood pooling around him. Ellen was in the hallway, her body crumpled, a deep gash across her chest. Upstairs, Noah was in his bed, his throat slashed, his rocket models scattered across the floor. Grace was in the closet, her small body curled into a ball, her neck bruised from strangulation. But Abigail was missing. Sheriff Clara Hayes arrived with her deputies. their faces grim as they surveyed the carnage. The walls bore signs of a struggle: scratches, blood spatter, a shattered lamp. A window in the back was broken, glass scattered outside. The sheriff noted a trail of blood leading into the yard, fading into the dirt. "This wasn't a robbery," she said to Deputy Ben Carter. "This was rage." By noon, Blackthorn Hollow was in chaos. News spread like wildfire, and reporters descended on the town, their cameras trained on the farmhouse. Dr. Henry Voss. The county coroner cataloged the wounds. Samuel had been struck with a blunt object, likely a tire iron. Ellen's chest wound was from a large knife, precise and deep. Noah's throat was cut with a smaller blade, and Grace had been strangled, her small frame marked with handprints. The brutality suggested a personal motive. But the unlocked back door hinted at familiarity. Abigail's absence was the focal point. Her room was in disarray, her fiddle broken, her phone missing, but there was no blood. A notebook under her bed contained lyrics about escape and betrayal. One line circled: "He watches from the hills." Sheriff Hayes zeroed in on Vincent Cole. His trailer was searched that afternoon, revealing a map of the town with the Whitaker farmhouse marked. A tire iron with blood traces and a photo of Ellen from years ago, taken in Louisville. Vincent was gone, his trailer empty, his car missing. An APB was issued, and the town braced for answers. Volunteers scoured the hills, their boots sinking into the mud. A bloodhound picked up Abigail's scent near an old mine, but the trail ended at a creek, the water swift and cold. As the investigation deepened, Ellen's past came into focus. A friend from Louisville, Sarah Klein, revealed that Ellen had been stalked by a man named Vincent Carver, who'd sent threatening letters after their breakup. Ellen had changed her name and moved to escape him, but Sarah had seen a man matching Vincent's description in Blackthorn Hollow weeks before the murders. Sheriff Hayes confirmed Vincent Cole was Vincent Carver. Using an alias to hide his past, Vincent's history was a web of violence: arrests for stalking, assault, and a dismissed charge of attempted kidnapping. He'd been obsessed with Ellen, blaming her for ruining his life. The photo in his trailer was from their brief relationship, a memento of his fixation. But why kill the entire family? And where was Abigail? On August 25th, a tip came from a trucker who'd seen a girl matching Abigail's description at a diner 40 miles away. She'd been with a man in a scarred jacket, her face pale, her hands shaking as she ate. The clerk said they'd left in a rusted pickup. Sheriff Hayes dispatched a team, but the trail went cold. Abigail's notebook offered another clue: a sketch of a mine called Devil's Jaw, a collapsed shaft rumored to be haunted. A search team reached Devil's Jaw at dusk on August 26th. The mine's entrance was hidden by overgrowth, but fresh footprints led inside. Deputies entered, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Deep in the shaft, they found Abigail, bound and gagged, her fiddle case beside her. She was alive but weak, her wrists chafed, her eyes wide with fear. A duffel bag nearby held $3,000 Samuels, savings for the farmhouse renovations. Abigail was rushed to the hospital, whispering about Vincent. She'd met him at the diner, drawn in by his stories of adventure. He'd promised her a way out of Blackthorn Hollow, exploiting her frustration with small-town life. She'd given him the farmhouse layout, thinking he'd steal the money and leave. But Vincent's obsession with Ellen had turned deadly, and Abigail became his pawn. Vincent's pickup was spotted in Tennessee on August 27th, abandoned at a gas station. Inside, police found Ellen's locket, a bloodied knife, and a journal. Ranting about revenge, Vincent had planned to punish Ellen by destroying her family, keeping Abigail as leverage. The manhunt stretched across the South, ending on August 29th, when a farmer in Alabama reported a man hiding in his barn. SWAT teams moved in, arresting Vincent without a fight. His scar gleamed in the flashlight beams, his face blank. Vincent Coles. Trial began in February 2018, the courthouse packed with grieving townsfolk. The prosecution presented a damning case. The tire iron matched Samuel's wounds. The knife matched Ellen's, and Abigail's testimony sealed his fate. She described how Vincent had manipulated her, promising freedom but delivering death. "I trusted him," she said, tears streaming. "I didn't know he'd kill them." Vincent was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, sentenced to life without parole. Abigail faced charges of conspiracy, but her cooperation led to a plea deal. 3 years in juvenile detention, followed by probation. The town was divided. Some pitied her, others scorned her. Blackthorn Hollow buried its dead in a somber ceremony. The Blackthorn Festival canceled. The Whitaker farmhouse was abandoned, its porch sagging under the weight of memory. A memorial garden was planted by the church, with a plaque for Samuel, Ellen, Noah, and Grace. Abigail, released in 2021, left Kentucky, her fiddle silent. Rumors say she lives in Nashville, playing in bars under a new name. Vincent's prison interviews revealed his obsession with Ellen, claiming she'd stolen his future. The town, once close-knit, grew wary, neighbors locking their doors. Rosie's Diner saw fewer customers, and the library stood empty. Blackthorn Hollow became a place of whispers, its hills haunted by the Whitakers' loss. Welcome back, listeners, to another descent into the darkness that lurks in the quiet corners of small-town America. Tonight, we travel to Pine Hollow, a speck of a town in the Missouri Ozarks, where the hills hum with secrets and the past refuses to stay buried. If you're joining us to unravel this haunting tale, drop a comment below to tell us where you're tuning in from, your city or country. Adds to the web of our global audience. Like and subscribe to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let the distant howl of the wind pull you into the mystery of Pine Hollow, where one family's hope for a new beginning was silenced by a brutal act of betrayal. Pine Hollow nestles in a valley surrounded by the craggy peaks of the Ozark Mountains, a town of 1,100 residents where life moves at the pace of the lazy river that cuts through its heart. Main Street boasts a hardware store, a diner called Dots, and a feed shop that doubles as a community hub. The air smells of pine needles and wood smoke, and the hills are dotted with cabins and old barns, some abandoned since the lumber mills closed in the 80s. The townsfolk are a mix of farmers, retirees, and families tied to the land by generations. Of stubborn pride, in the summer of 2019, Pine Hollow was a town clinging to its traditions. The annual Bluegrass Festival filled the square with banjo music and homemade quilts, and Sunday church services drew crowds in their best clothes. But beneath the surface, tensions brewed, land disputes over old logging rights, whispers of moonshine stills in the hills, and grudges that ran as deep as the river. Into this world stepped the Larson family, chasing a dream of simplicity and escape. Daniel Larson, 44, was a former paramedic from St. Louis. His broad shoulders and steady hands a testament to years spent saving lives. A burnout from the city's chaos and a messy custody battle over his kids pushed him to seek a quieter life. Pine Hollow's cheap land and promise of solitude drew him in. He bought a weathered cabin on 10 acres, its cedar walls sturdy despite years of neglect. Daniel was a man of action, quick to help a neighbor, but slow to share his own troubles, his hazel eyes carrying a flicker of exhaustion. His fiancée, Rebecca, censure by, was a graphic designer who traded corporate deadlines for freelance work. Her quick laugh and knack for sketching wildflowers made her a fast favorite at Dot's Diner. Rebecca had her own scars, a controlling ex-husband who'd left her wary of trust. She saw Pine Hollow as a chance to rebuild, to create a home where love could flourish. Her warmth balanced Daniel's stoicism, and together they dreamed of turning their cabin into a retreat for artists. Their children were Daniel's from his first marriage. Ethan, 16, was a lanky teenager with a passion for photography, his camera always slung around his neck. He resented the move, missing his city friends, but the hills offered endless subjects for his lens. Chloe, 13, was a dreamer, her nose buried in poetry books, her room filled with pressed leaves and handwritten verses. The youngest, 7-year-old Owen, was a bundle of curiosity, forever chasing frogs or building forts in the yard. The Larsons arrived in Pine Hollow in May 2019, their SUV packed with dreams and second-hand furniture. The townsfolk offered pies and cautious smiles, but some muttered about outsiders stirring up old wounds. In early June, a man named Travis Kane rolled into Pine Hollow. Lean and sunbaked, with a crooked grin and eyes like storm clouds, Travis was in his mid-30s, claiming to be a handyman looking for work. He rented a room above the feed shop, his duffel bag stuffed with tools and a battered guitar. Travis charmed the locals with his easy manner, fixing fences and telling tales of his travels. But his questions about the Larson property, its boundaries, its history raised eyebrows. He'd linger at dots, scribbling in a notebook, his gaze often fixed on Rebecca as she chatted with customers. Travis's arrival coincided with unsettling events. A shed on the Larson property was broken in two, tools scattered. Strange marking-screwed symbols carved into trees peered along the riverbank. At night, Ethan reported seeing a figure watching the cabin from the tree line, though the shadows revealed nothing. Owen began waking with nightmares, babbling about the man with the gray eyes. Daniel chalked it up to the kids adjusting, but Rebecca felt a growing unease. She'd seen Travis near their property, his guitar silent, his eyes locked on their windows. Rebecca confided in Dot, the diner's owner, who warned her about the land the Larsons had bought. It once belonged to the Hargrove family, a reclusive clan who'd lost everything in a bitter dispute over logging rights decades ago. Rumor had it a Hargrove son had sworn revenge, though no one knew if he was still alive. Rebecca brushed it off as small-town lore. But the carvings in the trees matched a sketch she'd found in an old book about local history. On July 20th, 2019, Larsons gathered for a quiet evening in their cabin. Daniel had spent the day repairing the porch while Rebecca worked on a logo for a local business. Ethan developed photos in a makeshift darkroom. Chloe wrote poetry by candlelight, and Owen built a tower of blocks that kept toppling. The Bluegrass Festival was a week away, and the family planned to attend, hoping to connect with the community. By 9 p.m., the children were in bed, and Daniel and Rebecca sat by the fire, the crackle of logs mingling with the hum of crickets outside. The night was still, the air heavy with the threat of a storm. At around 1:30 a.m., a neighbor, Miss Etta Price, woke to a muffled thud from the direction of the Larson cabin. From her porch, she saw a faint glow near the property, like a flashlight bobbing in the dark. Etta, a widow with poor eyesight, hesitated to call the sheriff, thinking it might be Daniel working late. By the time she dialed, the line was down. The storm had knocked out power across the valley at 6:15 a.m. A delivery driver, Carl Webb, pulled up to the Larson cabin with a shipment of paint. The front door hung open, the porch streaked with mud. Carl called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. Stepping inside, he froze. The living room was a wreck, furniture overturned. A coffee mug shattered on the floor. Blood stained the rug, a dark pool spreading toward the kitchen. Carl stumbled outside, fumbling for his phone, and called 911. Sheriff Lucas Boone arrived with his deputies, their boots heavy on the creaking porch. Inside, the scene was carnage. Daniel lay in the kitchen, his skull crushed, a hammer discarded. Nearby, Rebecca was in the hallway, her chest torn open by a jagged blade. Chloe was in her room, her throat slit, her poetry book stained red. Owen was in the attic, his small body crumpled, his neck bruised from strangulation. But Ethan was missing. The deputies swept the cabin, their faces pale. The walls bore claw marks, as if someone had fought back. A broken window in the back led to a trail of blood in the dirt, fading into the underbrush. Sheriff Boone noted the absence of forced entry. The front door had been unlocked. Someone they knew, he said to Deputy Anna Reed, or someone they trusted. By mid-morning, Pine Hollow was in a frenzy. News trucks lined the square, and townsfolk gathered in hushed knots, their eyes on the Larson cabin. Dr. Miriam Tate, the coroner, cataloged the wounds. Daniel's skull was shattered by a hammer, likely from his own toolbox. Rebecca's chest wound came from a hunting knife, precise and deep. Chloe's throat was cut with a smaller blade, and Owen had been strangled, his small frame marked with finger bruises. The savagery suggested a personal vendetta, but the unlocked door pointed to betrayal. Ethan's absence was the key mystery. His room was chaotic, photos torn, his camera smashed, but no blood. A memory card under his bed held a single image: a man with gray eyes standing by the river, labeled TK. In Ethan's scrawl, Sheriff Boone targeted Travis Kane. A search of his room above the feed shop revealed a map of Pine Hollow with the Larson cabin circled, a hunting knife with blood traces, and a photo of the Hargrove family from decades ago. One face circled: a young man who looked eerily like Travis. Travis was gone, his room empty, his truck missing. An APB went out, and volunteers scoured the hills, their flashlights piercing the fog. A bloodhound picked up Ethan's scent near the river, but it vanished at a rocky outcrop, the water erasing any trace. The investigation uncovered a chilling link. The Larson cabin sat on land once owned by the Hargrove family, who'd lost it in a 1970s dispute with a logging company. The Hargroves had a son, Travis Hargrove, who'd vanished after swearing to reclaim the land. Records showed Travis. Kane was Travis Hargrove, using an alias to return to Pine Hollow. His notebook contained rants about the Larsons stealing his birthright. Alongside sketches of the cabin's layout, Sheriff Boone dug deeper, finding that Travis had a history of petty crimes: arson, theft, stalking. He'd been obsessed with the land, believing it held secrets tied to his family's downfall. The carvings in the trees were Hargrove family symbols, a claim to the territory. But why kill the entire family? And where was Ethan? On July 22nd, a tip came from a gas station clerk 60 miles away. A boy matching Ethan's description had bought a soda, accompanied by a man with a crooked grin. The clerk noted the boy looked scared, his hands trembling. They'd left in a dusty pickup. Sheriff Boone sent a team, but the trail went cold. Ethan's memory card offered another clue: a photo of an old barn in the hills, labeled Hargrove Hideout. A search team reached the barn on July 23rd, its roof sagging, its walls marked with the same symbols as the trees. Inside, they found Ethan tied to a chair, his face bruised, his camera lens cracked. He was alive but shaken, his wrists raw from ropes. A bag nearby held $4,000 Daniel's savings for the artist retreat. Ethan was rushed to the hospital, whispering about Travis and a plan gone wrong. Ethan's story unfolded in fragments. He'd met Travis while photographing the river, drawn in by his tales of the hills. Travis had exploited Ethan's anger at the move, promising him money to escape Pine Hollow. Ethan had shared the cabin's layout, thinking it was a simple theft. But Travis's obsession with the Hargrove land turned deadly, and Ethan became his hostage. Travis's pickup was found in Arkansas on July 24th, abandoned at a rest stop. Inside, police found Rebecca's sketchbook, a bloodied hammer, and a journal, detailing Travis's plan to reclaim the land by eliminating the Larsons. The manhunt spanned the Ozarks, ending on July 26th when a hiker spotted Travis camping near a creek. SWAT teams closed in, arresting him as he tried to flee. His grin was gone, his eyes cold and defiant. Travis Kane's trial began in January 2020. The courtroom packed with angry townsfolk. The prosecution presented the hammer, matched to Daniel's wounds, and the knife. Linked to Rebecca's, Ethan's testimony was heartbreaking. He described how Travis had manipulated him. Promising freedom, but delivering death, I thought. He was my friend, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I didn't know he'd hurt them. Travis was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping, sentenced to life without parole. Ethan faced charges of conspiracy, but his cooperation led to a plea deal, 2 years in juvenile detention, followed by probation. Pine Hollow was split. Some saw Ethan as a victim, others as a traitor. Pine Hollow buried the Larsons in a quiet ceremony. The Bluegrass Festival canceled. The cabin was left to rot, its windows boarded up. A memorial stone was placed by the river, etched with the family's names. Ethan, released in 2022, left Missouri, his camera untouched. Rumors say he works in a bookstore in Chicago. His photos unpublished. Travis's prison letters, leaked to the press, revealed his fixation on the Hargrove land, claiming it was cursed by outsiders. Pine Hollow grew quieter, its residents locking their doors. Dot's Diner saw fewer faces, and the feed shop closed. The town became a shadow, its hills echoing with the Larsons' loss. Welcome, listeners, to the final chapter of our chilling journey, where we venture into the ghostly quiet of Cinder Lake, a town in northern Minnesota where the frozen lakes hide secrets as cold as the winter air. This is a story of dreams shattered, trust betrayed, and a darkness that lingers like frost on a window pane. If you're joining us to unravel this haunting tale, leave a comment below to share where you're tuning in from. Your corner of the world weaves into our tapestry of listeners. Like and subscribe to keep these stories alive. Now, let the crackle of a distant fire draw you into the mystery of Cinder Lake, where one family's new beginning burned to ashes in a single night. Cinder Lake sits on the edge of a frozen expanse. In Minnesota's Iron Range, a town of 800 souls, where the winters are long and the summers fleeting. The main street is a modest strip with a bait shop, a tavern called the Rusty Hook, and a community center where locals gather for bingo and potlucks. The lake, fringed with pine and birch, glitters under the sun but turns ominous under moonlight, its surface hiding depths that locals avoid after dark. The town's economy leans on fishing, small crafts, and the occasional tourist drawn to the stark beauty of the north. In the winter of 2022, Cinder Lake was a place of stubborn endurance. The annual ice fishing derby brought bursts of life, but the town was fading, its young leaving for cities like Duluth. The locals clung to their routines: church on Sundays, coffee at the Rusty Hook, and stories of the lake's supposed curse tied to a fire that razed a homestead decades ago. Into this icy world came the Nolan family, seeking solace after a season of loss. James Nolan, 46, was a former firefighter from Minneapolis, his broad frame and steady hands marked by years of battling blazes. A workplace injury collapsed beam that crushed his leg ended his career, leaving him with a limp and a pension that barely covered the bills. Cinder Lake, with its cheap cabins and quiet isolation, offered a chance to heal. James bought a lakeside home, its log walls sturdy but weathered, dreaming of teaching his kids to fish and rebuilding his strength. His wife, Sarah, 41, was a social worker with a warm smile and a knack for listening. She'd spent years helping families in crisis, but the toll of her work and James's injury strained their marriage. Sarah saw Cinder Lake as a fresh start, a place to reconnect with her family and escape the city's relentless pace. All she carried. A private grief: her brother had died in a house fire years earlier, a loss she never fully processed. Their children were their anchor. Liam, 18, was a hockey player with a quick temper and a loyal heart. Frustrated by the move but determined to protect his family. Ava, 15, was a budding writer. Her journals filled with stories of adventure and romance. Her quiet nature, hiding a fierce curiosity. The youngest, 8-year-old Finn, was a whirlwind of energy, obsessed with building snow forts and sketching the lake's icy patterns. The Nolans arrived in Cinder Lake in November 2021, their truck packed with boxes and hope. The townsfolk greeted them with hot cider and wary glances, some welcoming, others skeptical of newcomers. James took odd jobs fixing boats. Sarah volunteered at the community center, and the kids adjusted to the small school. For a moment, the Nolans seemed to fit in, their laughter echoing across the lake. But something was watching, waiting for the ice to crack in early December. A man named Gideon Holt arrived in Cinder Lake, gaunt and weathered, with a graying beard and eyes like chipped ice. Gideon was in his late 30s, claiming to be a writer researching the region's history. He rented a shack near the lake, his pickup truck loaded with books and a battered typewriter. Gideon was charming when he wanted to be, regaling locals at the Rusty Hook with tales of his travels. But his questions about the Nolan property, old fires and land disputes set nerves on edge. Gideon's presence stirred unease. He'd linger near the school, watching kids skate on the frozen lake or wander the woods at dusk, his flashlight cutting through the snow. The bait shop owner, Mr. Lars, caught him sketching the Nolan cabin, his drawings precise, almost obsessive. "That man's got ghosts," Lars told Sarah, his voice low. Sarah nodded, but her mind was on the strange occurrences at home: missing tools, scratches on the cabin's door, and Finn's tales of a shadow man by the lake. Sarah's unease grew when she saw Gideon at the community center, his eyes lingering on her as she organized a book drive. She confided in James, who brushed it off as small-town paranoia. But Ava, ever observant, noticed Gideon's truck parked near their property late at night, its engine idling. She wrote in her journal, "He knows something about us. I don't trust him." On January 15, 2022, the Nolans gathered for a cozy evening in their cabin. James had built a roaring fire. Sarah baked cookies, and the kids played cards, Liam's laughter filling the room. The ice fishing derby was days away, and the family planned to join, hoping to bond with the community. By 10 p.m., the children were in bed, and James and Sarah sat by the fire. The wind howling outside as a blizzard loomed. The night was bitter, the lake frozen solid, the air thick with snow. At around 2 a.m., a neighbor, Mrs. Clara Dunn, woke to a faint glow from the Nolan property knot, the warm flicker of a hearth, but something sharper, angrier. Peering through her window, she saw flames licking the cabin's walls. Clara, frail and housebound, called the sheriff, her voice trembling. The storm had downed phone lines, delaying the response until the fire was already raging. At 5:30 a.m., volunteer firefighter Tom Ellis reached the Nolan cabin, the blizzard easing but the fire still smoldering. The front door was charred, the windows blown out, smoke curling into the dawn. Tom called out, his voice hoarse, but only the crackle of embers answered. Inside, the cabin was a ruin, walls blackened, furniture reduced to ash. In the living room, James lay near the fireplace. His body burned beyond recognition, a fire axe buried in his chest. Sarah was in the kitchen, her throat slashed, her body half consumed by flames. Ava was in her room, her journals scorched, her body crumpled from stab wounds. Finn was in the basement, his small frame curled in a corner, suffocated by smoke. But Liam was missing. Sheriff Ellen Pike arrived with her deputies, their faces grim as they navigated the wreckage. The fire had been set deliberately. Gasoline traces lingered in the air, and a can was found in the yard. A trail of blood led from the back door into the snow, vanishing in the drifts. Sheriff Pike noted the axe wasn't from the Nolans. Tool shed. It was an antique, marked with initials GH. This was planned, she told Deputy Mark Voss. Someone wanted them gone. By noon, Cinder Lake was in shock. News crews braved the snow, and townsfolk gathered at the Rusty Hook, whispering about curses and revenge. Dr. Ruth Carver, the coroner, catalogued the wounds. James's axe wound was post-mortem, the fire masking blunt trauma to his skull. Sarah's throat was cut with a sharp blade, likely a hunting knife. Ava had been stabbed repeatedly, her wounds frantic. Finn's death was from smoke inhalation, his small lungs overwhelmed. The fire's intensity suggested an accelerant, and the unlocked back door hinted at familiarity. Liam's absence was the central puzzle. His room was untouched by fire, but chaotic, his hockey stick broken, his phone gone. A journal entry in Ava's room, spared by the flames, read, "Liam's scared." He saw GH by the lake, watching. Sheriff Pike zeroed in on Gideon Holt. His shack was searched, revealing a map of Cinder Lake with the Nolan cabin marked, a hunting knife with blood traces, and an old photo of a burned homestead labeled Holtland, 1975. Gideon was gone, his shack empty, his truck missing. An APB was issued, and volunteers braved the snow to search the woods. A bloodhound picked up Liam's scent near the lake, but the trail ended at the ice, the blizzard, erasing any trace. The investigation uncovered a dark history. The Nolan cabin sat on land once owned by the Holt family, destroyed in a 1975 fire that killed Gideon's parents. The official report called it an accident, but locals whispered of arson tied to a land dispute with a rival family. Gideon, then, a child, was sent to foster care, but he'd returned to Cinder Lake under an alias, obsessed with reclaiming his family's legacy. His notebook contained rants about the Nolans desecrating his land, alongside sketches of their cabins. Layout. Sheriff Pike dug into Gideon's past, finding arrests for arson and stalking in other towns. He'd been fixated on the Holt land, believing it held secrets tied to his parents' deaths. The antique axe was a family heirloom, passed down from his father. But why kill the entire family? And where was Liam? On January 17th, a tip came from a trucker who saw a boy matching Liam's description at a gas station 50 miles away. He was with a man in a gray coat, his face bruised, his movements sluggish. The clerk said they'd left in a snow-covered truck. Sheriff Pike sent a team, but the trail vanished in the storm. Ava's journal offered a clue, a sketch of a cave near the lake, labeled Holt's Hide. A search team reached the cave on January 18th, its entrance half buried in snow. Inside, they found Liam, bound and shivering, his hockey jersey torn. He was alive but hypothermic, his wrists raw from ropes. A bag nearby held $2,500, James's savings for a new boat. Liam was rushed to the hospital, muttering about Gideon and a plan gone wrong. Liam's story emerged in pieces. He'd met Gideon while fishing, drawn in by his stories of the lake's history. Gideon exploited Liam's frustration with the move, promising money to fund his hockey dreams. Liam had shared the cabin's layout, thinking it was a theft, but Gideon's obsession with the Holt land turned murderous, and Liam became his hostage. Gideon's truck was found in Wisconsin on January 19th, abandoned at a rest stop. Inside, police found Sarah's necklace, a bloodied knife, and a journal detailing Gideon's plan to cleanse the land with fire. The manhunt crossed state lines, ending on January 21st, when a ranger spotted Gideon in a forest cabin. SWAT teams arrested him as he tried to start another fire, his eyes wild with defiance. Gideon Holt's trial began in August 2022, the courtroom packed with grieving locals. The prosecution presented the axe, matched to James's wounds, and the knife linked to Sarah's. Liam's testimony was raw. He described Gideon's manipulation, promising freedom but delivering death. "I thought he'd just take the money," Liam said, his voice hollow. "I didn't know he'd burn." Then, Gideon was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder, arson, and kidnapping, sentenced to life without parole. Liam faced charges of conspiracy, but his cooperation led to a plea deal, 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by probation. Cinder Lake was divided. Some saw Liam as a victim, others as a fool who'd opened the door to a killer. Cinder Lake buried the Nolans in a snow-dusted ceremony. The ice fishing derby canceled. The cabin's ruins were cleared. The land left barren. A memorial plaque was placed by the lake, etched with the family's names. Liam, released in 2024, left Minnesota, his hockey stick untouched. Rumors say he works on a fishing boat in Alaska. His dreams of the rink forgotten. Gideon's prison writings, leaked online, revealed his obsession with the Holt land, claiming it was cursed by thieves. Cinder Lake grew quieter, its residents locking their doors. The Rusty Hook saw fewer patrons, and the community center stood empty. The town became a ghost, its lake reflecting the ashes of the Nolans' dreams.